Hey, everybody, and welcome to this conversation with. Would you go by Bill? I have William here. So, William from UserFriendly.
William or Bill. I mean,
Would
either
you
way,
go,
people
Bill?
have called me worse, so either helps, but usually Bill.
But Bill, okay. So, Bill from UserFriendly. And I was going to butcher your last name here. Would I say Sickens or
Yeah.
Sykens?
No, it's Sickens. You got it spot on.
Oh, okay. Because sometimes whenever you have sometimes people have a long vowel on their name for whatever reason. So I didn't want to get it wrong. So,
No
but
worries, no worries, but no, spot on.
Bill has a program called UserFriendly, which you can find here at userfriendlyshow.com. It's also on the radio in Portland and Seattle. Am I right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So that was just out of memory. Go figure. I should have looked that up beforehand, but I didn't. So I was just yanking it out of my head.
Hey, no worries. You had it right. So why look it up?
Yeah, that's right. But I've been on Bill's show a few times, and I thought, would it be fun to sit down and talk a little bit about his journey to doing these kind of things? So my first question, Bill, would be user-friendly. How did it start?
Well, it's kind of a fun story. We started back in 2013. So this is our 12th year doing the show. And the funny thing about it is this whole thing started in my kitchen. So at the time, I lived in Reno, Nevada, and we would have friends over every week to do tabletop role playing.
Mm-hmm.
And one night we got done, and somebody said this would make a good topic for doing a podcast at the time. But podcasting was really a new thing back in the day, so it's like, well, okay, we'll think about it. And then I worked in the business community and everything like that, and kind of threw the idea around, and had one of the local radio stations come back and say, hey, well, if you want to do technology, at the time that's what it was, we would love to give you a go. So
cool.
A few weeks later, I end up with a schedule, and we're on the air on a very small station, but still, it's where we started, half-hour format at the time. And I think we did 8 or 9 episodes of that, and that was how we got started.
So on the air in Reno, is that
in Reno? Yeah, at the time.
Oh, that's cool. So you were talking about role playing game, and then you're saying that. But how did you get from role playing games into technology as a general thing? Because it seems, I mean, there's some connection there, but it's not direct.
Oh, it's not even indirect. I mean, I guess today you could argue a connection maybe with some of the tools and stuff, but
right.
At the time, no, it was definitely very much two different things. And that's why it's also a little bit odd how that came into being. So a little bit of the background on that. I've since 1998 have run a technology company, and as a career as a software engineer, and do some things like that in addition to our show. So that's where the technology end of it came from. And
okay.
That's what I was kind of known for in the area. But it was and is a very niche audience. There's a lot of people that are interested in technology, but it is very specific. Mm-hmm. And in today's world, doing a podcast, it would work a lot better just because anybody around the world that is interested can listen. That you're not limited to who happens to tune in on the air that week.
Right.
But what happened is like I say, we're do role-playing games, and on a hobby side, do cosplay and go to the Comic-Cons and all this kind of stuff. And we were at a Comic-Con that was put on at the time by Steve Wozniak in San Jose, California. That was a Comic-Con that combined pop culture and technology. So our team decided if Apple can do it, so can we. And at the time, I mean,
of course.
Why not go with the winners, right?
Yeah.
So
that's what Microsoft said for the Zune.
The what? No, I'm kidding. Yes. There have been a few things like that out there, but in this case, and this isn't the Apple Lisa either, if you've ever heard of that.
Right.
It's, but it was an idea to be able to blend the two together, and they wanted us to go to an hour format at the time. And so I proposed it, and said, let's give it a go and give it a try. And it worked quite well. So that's what we've been doing since then. So we cover both topics. And as time has gone by, they have blended a lot more together. So the role-playing gaming side of it certainly can include video games and all of that type of a thing. And the technology side of that's pretty self-explanatory. But having the two together has really benefited. I think our audience likes it a lot better. And I get that because our numbers went up when we started doing that. And it's a lot more enjoyable to do because there's a lot more material to be able to pull from to present.
Right. Yeah. So you have a bigger pool, right? Can I ask
Absolutely.
what game were you playing? Were you playing Dungeons and Dragons or was it a different role
Of course, it
play?
was Dungeons. It's
Okay.
Dungeons and Dragons for everybody, right? No,
Well, I
no,
just
we
had
do.
to. There's a lot of other ones, so I mean, it could have been something else. So
Yeah, and I footnote that with I actually do play a lot of different games, but at the time it was Dungeons and Dragons specifically.
yeah,
And we had just the one technology blend is we had gotten this app on our smart speaker. I won't say the name to activate everybody's here, but on
right.
our smart speaker, and that would actually do dice rolls and give you some of the rules back. So we were playing with that, and that's part of what came into this could be a good idea. So there was a
Hmm.
little bit of technology, very early version of it, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool though. So that's so fun that you're like, hey, why don't we do this? And then you just go and do it. But it sounds like, as far as your background though, you're a bit entrepreneurial, I'm guessing. So you said software, and so are you the boss?
Yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah.
and like I say, I do both sides of it. If I attempted to live on what I did get on doing the show, not so much now, but in the beginning, I certainly would have been in a very different situation. So I needed
Yeah.
to, needed to have both. But that's where I started my career was doing software design. Originally, we had a store in a mall in Reno that sold hardware, and that's
Hmm.
where that started, and then kind of morphed out of that, and over the years dropped the hardware part of it, just went to software,
Right.
and now we do software and robotics. But that end of it definitely gave a lot of exposure to the technology side of things, and
Mhm.
a lot of people don't talk about it well. So one of the things we seem to be able to do is take subjects that were normally in the clouds and explain it and discuss it in a way that everybody could relate to it and understand what it was. And that is really what kind of keyed into all of this in the very beginning.
Oh yeah. So exactly. I think everybody gets, my guess is, just from, my knowledge base, they're like, oh, talk to Bill, he'll fix your computer for you. And then you became that guy, right? So you're the guy that knows these answers, and everybody kind of comes to you and does that. But it's not necessarily, all their questions aren't overly complicated. It's just, they just don't, they just can't, they don't click with it, right? So, but yeah, bringing it to the masses like that, I think is a very good thing. I mean, and at this point, we're all going in that direction. I do find it funny though, Bill, that so I have children, and so I've been involved in technology. From the early days when you mentioned Lisa, yes, from even earlier than Lisa, and it seems like today's kids, or even young people, whatever you want to say, um, don't have the same immersion. So I was totally immersed in all this because it was all happening, right? So everything was coming up, everything was happening. I was curious and so forth. But now it seems like everybody's more, and it kind of reflects your show, a user, right? So they don't get into the background of things. If it doesn't work, then they don't think about it. Do you find that's the case now, or?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a change that we've seen just kind of in the industry, really, because back in like what you're talking about, Apple Lisa, and I started with things like 8-bit Atari computers and Commodore
Mhm.
64 and all of that.
Yeah.
And you were encouraged in that time that you got the computer, you figured out how to plug it in and turn it on, and you got a ready prompt. And if you didn't know what to do with it, it didn't do anything, right? So
Right, exactly.
so
You
and there
you
were
had to
manuals on how
program
to
it.
how to program it, how to modify it, all these kind of things were encouraged. You look at the original Apple IIs and those type of things, the same thing. Now fast forward to now, and it's like the hardware is being designed from a standpoint that they don't want you to touch it.
Right.
And so it does change very much how people look at and deal with things. I think the other side of it too is back in that time period, having even a computer at home and some of these things was not the norm. And now
Sure.
today we all carry one in our pocket and it's just part of life. And it doesn't really matter what industry you work in or anything, you're going to be dealing with technology. So it's just kind of part of the
Hmm.
world and you just deal with it. So yes, it is a fundamental change in the way that people interact and work with these things. And over the years, our shows kind of followed that because a lot of at the very beginning, and I'm sure like you, a lot of our programming is based on the feedback from our listeners and that type of a thing. And the questions have changed from, oh, I have, this, and I'm trying to figure out how to do this. How do I, repair it, or that kind of a situation, to, well, the old one broke and I threw it away. What do you recommend buying? I mean, that is how that has changed.
Right.
And it is a big difference.
The disposable society. Yeah. In a way. Yeah. I always find it interesting because I have 2 kids. One is more interested in the background of things and so forth, and one isn't. If it's working great and they can use it really well and use it better than me, I mean, they're into the interface, right? They're into the interface of things and how to shortcut that, but they don't really have any interest in how it works. It just works, and as long as it's working, they're fantastic with it. So yeah, I do find that interesting. Just an aside here, my first computer was a TI 99 4A.
Oh wow, okay.
So yeah,
right, yeah.
Very, very akin to the Commodore 64. And I was, I actually bought it myself, which is a whole other thing. But the very different times back then with those kind of things. It had a cartridge thing, so it was kind of a weird hybrid of stuff. If you look at the Texas Instruments version of things, but very interesting nonetheless. But on your show, then you're evolving with your audience, so that you're not doing IRQs or anything like that in the background. You're just talking about how things work and how you can utilize them best for yourself, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's a very conversational style, and we've always done it that way just because it seems like that's what people enjoy, and was the easiest way to put it together, and it's worked quite well. So exactly as you say, people will ask their questions, we answer them on the air. Sometimes we invite our guests that way, certainly do the programming from that, and then we look at topics that are relevant to, this hack or that problem or this new piece of hardware, that kind of a thing, and generally cover that type of stuff a little bit. And it's just an amalgamation of all of those different things. And it changes. I mean, what's relevant changes based on where we are in time. 2 years ago, very few people have heard of AI. Now it's the rage, that kind of a thing. So it's, it's kind of fun too, because if you look back with the longevity of it and listen to some of the coverages of technology in, 2015, this is brand new and, state of the art and that kind of a thing. And I'm thinking, I think I might still have that in the back of a drawer somewhere.
Yeah, no kidding. Storage was always my thing, because it's like we had a zip drive, jazz drive, they're all based off of a floppy. And then now, of course, we don't have any kind of moving storage anymore. Everything's solid state storage. And next will be, what is it? Quartz crystals or something, where they're doing things with that. But so as you're going on this journey, right? So you start to do the podcast in 13. What kind of, obviously it's an outlet for you, but why did you say, we need to go this route? Is it, you did the radio show first, I'm guessing, and then you transitioned it to be a podcast, it sounds like. Is that correct?
Yeah, basically what started it really, because, somebody's got to pay for all this, right? So what started it was
well, that's generally you pay for it.
Right? Yeah, unfortunately, right. But no, the initial justification from that standpoint and what really drove it was as a way to promote the programming business. So you have on air and do the tech expert thing and all that kind of stuff. And what really pushed it, and what was our first episode, was Google Glass. And if you remember back to that period, there were all kind of, the world was going to be taken over by this. And living in Nevada, the big concern was that you could take it into the casino and cheat. Right. And so it's like, okay.
Yeah, you could count cards, right? Because you could see every card. And
exactly. At least that was the fear. And at that period, the casinos were it depended on the property, but you couldn't use your phone on the casino floor in some places and stuff like that. And it was a big concern. Nowadays, nobody cares just because it's turned out to not be a problem. But in that period, you had this $4,000 plus item that nobody knew what it was. And here it is that everybody's, banning it. So what is it? So that was the first episode. We talked about that. And that's really where everything started initially. And then we kind of went from there. And then they took the show and put it on the local NPR station, some other things like that.
Oh, cool.
Which was kind of cool. And, so yeah, but the starting of this was meant to be kind of a promotional tool for the computer business. And to this day, we still have that in the header, although I would say the reason we do it and have done it for the majority of the time is out of enjoyment. I love working with people. I love the feedback we get from our listeners, and I love being able to have that kind of interaction and be able to talk about something that is interesting to a lot of people.
Yeah. Interesting you mentioned Google Glass, because just as a kind of with podcasting. So podcasting basically entered its 21st year, I suppose. 2004-ish was podcasting. The term was coined and so forth, and the RSS enclosure. So that's been 21 years. So Google Glass would be, you said 2013. So then that means in 2033 we should see it everywhere. So if you look at a 20-year cycle, if that's the case, then the technology is introduced, and now it has to kind of like fester and and so forth in the background, and then it'll come forward and be everywhere, kind of like podcasting. Because back in 2013, even then, so that wasn't the heyday. I'd say that was one of the I always call it the first big bump is 2011 for podcasting. So 2004 it came onto the scene. 2011 ish, it came, to more people, and now it's everywhere. In 2020, essentially, was the next wave. So, do you look at things like that, since you've been dealing with technology for so long, in waves, and do you see any kind of patterns like that emerging in any other spaces that you can think of over the years?
Well, what you're talking about with like the idea of Google Glass and it perpetuating into things is spot on. In fact, there is a thing called Moore's Law that talks about this kind of stuff, and it defines how technology will progress and basically the direction it goes. And so far, since that was coined at Intel, I believe in the 50s, it has proven to be the case in kind of governing. And it's basically what you just said, is you have something that starts here and it proliferates, and then you eventually get there. Now, as a point on the Google Glass, I don't know if we're going to see that specific product, but you look at this year and we're starting to see HUD glasses, which is basically the same thing. And we've had smart glasses for a while. I mean, I even use them to record right now. That's how I do my headset. But the actual ones that have video and those kind of things in them are starting to get on the market. So that's right, spot on. I think it's a new technology now. We'll see it going that direction in the future. And with things like podcasting too, just to kind of speak to that a little bit, it is very interesting to see how that has evolved, because when we started in 2013, it's like, oh, you might do a podcast, but that was not something. You're on the air. That's what you do, right? And it has flip-flopped, and it has gotten to a point now in 2020, the COVID era was really what pushed, I think, a lot of this stuff over the edge. But we're still on the air, but 90% of our listeners listen to the podcast. The additional 10%, about 9%, listen to the stream from the various radio stations, and maybe 1% actually tune it in on a radio somewhere, so it's
right. Yeah, it's flipped, right? So over this last I'd say 5 to 7 years, it's totally flipped, which is really quite interesting to think about. I mean, it is kind of mind-boggling, especially if you and I both have our foot firmly in terrestrial communication for our younger days, to see that this thing has really flopped over, and digital communication, podcasting, and so forth is really the winner right now. This is what's happening. This is what it is. There's not, the terrestrial side of things is not, innovating like the digital side of things is. And I think, what do you think as far as that goes? I mean, should we just turn them all off? I mean, what's the thought for radio stations?
I think there is also an attitude towards what defines that. As far as radio stations go, I think they still have their place, but the delivery of digital media has become so much easier and more available in recent years. Used to be, if you drove your car, you had a CD or you listened to the radio, and the idea of streaming music from your phone to the car stereo was not something you would have done. And that's come into play in the last 5 years or so. And now everybody does it, So that makes a huge difference. But the other thing of it is also looking at where one is in the world. I know that we're working, the show is on in the UK now in some places, and I've been learning about that. And their radio, I don't think they even have AM anymore. They do
Mm-hmm.
have FM in the conventional sense, but they have a thing called DAB, or DAB plus as it is now, which
Mm-hmm.
is digital audio broadcast. So it's basically a terrestrial way of getting a radio signal, but it has all the features of digital.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little bit different. That's not something that we really have here in the States, at least not an equivalent.
Right.
So,
Well, they had a thing called HD radio for a while, which was kind of similar, but not quite, I think.
yeah,
If
it
you're
didn't
familiar
have
with
the,
that, yeah.
it didn't, I don't know, it wasn't adopted in the same way. And
Mm-mm.
HD radio actually does still exist. I have a tuner, I think, on my car radio for that, but it's not something that, it's just not something that if I'm not going to get in the car and go, oh, I'm going to listen to the HD radio today. No, I'm either
Right.
going to stream or use a USB stick. I mean, that's how you do it now. And
Mm-hmm.
at least here.
Yeah, no, yeah. And satellite was a whole thing for a really short amount of time. And I mean, it's still in existence and so forth, but I don't think other than um folks who are really into it for some, that kind of niche kind of thing, or people who travel great distances, I think are really the satellite people at this point. And there's not like a big mass audience for satellite radio so much either anymore. I guess with it all going like this, it's to me it's interesting because and I'm getting into kind of maybe legal interesting territory. So if you're dealing with FCC because you're on the regular radio, FCC is the Federal Communications Commission that governs all television radio stations and frequencies for the government, right? So FCC is much different than the internet because there's no FCC of the internet so far. And so do you think that something's going to happen in that direction as we move forward? Because there was a reason they put the FCC into existence. And that reason online now, could still be there if you think about it, because it's the people's airwaves. But whenever you're talking about the internet, you could say it's the people's internet. What's
Yeah,
your
and true.
what's your
And
thoughts on that?
well, and I think what we need to look at for something like that is to look at this thing, if you remember it, called cable television, I believe. And
Hmm.
but when you look at it, there was different layers of regulation. You didn't have the restrictions in certain aspects of that you did on over-the-air broadcasts. The idea being is that you have a choice to, subscribe and turn it on and off and that kind of a thing. If it's over the air, everybody can get to it. And I think in many ways, the internet is looking the same way. They do have some regulation. For example, if you are on YouTube, you have to define whether your videos are targeted to children. And if they are, do certain things. And you have to identify what that is. And there are certain things like that. But you're also looking at a situation that it would be much, much harder to put regulation like that, because cable television, over the air, radio, television, whatever the case may be, originated from a certain point. Whether that was your radio or television station or your cable provider or satellite provider, that kind of a thing. The internet, you can originate from anywhere in the world, and there's no way to really block or change that. So if the FCC was to attempt to regulate internet broadcasts or narrowcasts is what they're technically called in the United States, how would they really be able to enforce that? And how would they be able to enforce it with anybody that is outside of the country? I mean, we can't even seem to get rid of the robocalls that are working that way, much less taking on the whole internet, right? So,
Sure.
I think
But
that,
we do have, if you think about China and their restrictions on their internet, they do a pretty good job of keeping things out of China they don't want in China. And oddly enough, TikTok is an example of America keeping things from China out of America for at least a short period of time recently in that. But I think you're alluding to self-regulation is the way to go, because that's what YouTube is doing. They're self-regulating. They're saying we're going to put some things in place so that we don't need government involvement. And I think a lot of the big companies do that. I mean, for the most part.
yeah.
I mean, obviously, it's very difficult. It's incredibly difficult given the situations online and the fact that things can be generated so easily and quickly that you can't fend off the hordes forever, as it were.
Absolutely.
So,
And the other thing is the sheer availability of material. There are many content creators, many companies that do different things. So it isn't restricted to a broadcast schedule on a radio station. It's simultaneous, that there are, I think, in the millions of streams or something right now. I'd have to look up the number, but it's some huge amount like that you can get to at any one time. So that changes it. And yeah, China's doing a good job of blocking things. Russia's trying to do the same thing.
Right.
But at the end of the day, that closes down all of the other aspects. And do we really want to sit and deal with something like that? And even if we did, does it actually work? Both countries, if you have a VPN, you can get around those firewalls and get to the open internet. It's not like it's the only way to completely cut it off would be to have a restricted network that doesn't attach to anything else, or something like that, which has been toyed with, but it does restrict it to a point where it's almost not usable anymore. So that, you've got to balance these different things. And as far as self-regulation goes, yeah, the reputable broadcasters and companies do it. I mean, look, most social media sites regulate to some extent. Your YouTube, like you just mentioned, and platforms like that have certain things. If you go and one of the issues we had with that is actually the some of the terminology will demonetize or hide your videos, and they don't like certain terms. So if we are working with something on a video game console like a light zapper, we have to refer to that as a wireless hole punch, because if you use the other words, they will block your show.
Right. Have you learned that by trial and error, or is there a list?
Yes, and by trial and error, definitely, and figuring out what was actually going on. And the thing of it is there's a very valid reason for that in some ways. But again, there's so much content that they can't have a human sit there and go, okay, this is talking about a accessory for a video game console or something like that, versus this is talking about someone wanting to, commit a crime or do something horrible. So the algorithm just shuts it down completely. And, but I don't know that there would be another way to do it, really. Not that wouldn't be extremely expensive and probably over the top for even being able to implement.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I'm guessing at this point, you've got your FCC license then, right? So you're licensed to be on the air?
Through our radio station.
Through your radio station. Okay.
Yeah. So that's handled, that we have a network that syndicates us and all that kind of thing. And they handle the legal aspect, all those
logistics. Okay. Well, so let's I kind of got a far afield with my questions there, but let's come back to user-friendly. And so you've been doing this for a while now, obviously, and producing content and so forth. So where do you have a roadmap for yourself, like for the next 5 years? I mean, obviously you have to change with the trends, but is there some goals in mind that you're trying to reach?
Well, first of all, the shock and surprise that they renewed our contract for another 3 years was one. Good
for you. Congratulations.
I say that tongue in cheek too. I mean, it's been a great thing, but usually, time goes by and things do get stale. But we have the opportunity, because of the content that we cover, to always have something fresh to bring to the table, and I think that helps with being able to keep things relevant. And as far as going down the next 5 years, one of the things that we definitely are working on, that we started 2 years ago. We actually 2 years ago had a tragedy in that one of our original hosts passed away unexpectedly. And totally out there. At that time, it's like, okay, what are we going to do? Are we going to even keep going? And one of the other people that had been with us since the beginning, Bill Snodgrass, stepped up to take his position. He's our producer, and now he also does the on-air spots. So that stopped us with a little bit of the progression of new things at the time, just to kind of regroup. But we're getting to a point now where we are back to that. And one of the big things is to add a video aspect. So being on the radio and originally being just a podcast, that wasn't something that was even considered, and still being on the radio, obviously it isn't. But as far as new media is concerned, people would like to see that. I don't know why people want to see my face, but if they do, well, hey, but the thing of it is, at the end of the day, I think that will bring a little bit more of a rich content to what we're able to do. And what that'll end up doing, though, is we'll have probably for the first time a production that's for on air and something that's a little bit different for online, focused around the same topics every week, but we'll be able to do more just with video, because we'll be able to have that aspect of it that we wouldn't on the radio. Plus, podcasts and vodcasts and all that kind of thing don't have a talk clock. So we have to fit into certain windows because of commercials and time slots and all that kind of thing, which is just normal for terrestrial production, and there's no problem. But one of the things is that does go away if you look at it from that standpoint from the online version of things. So being able to use that a little bit more. But I think we're going to go by the aspect too of it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, we're not going to make any huge changes to what we bring and how we do things from that kind of a standpoint. We're just going to increase the rich media, be able to bring a little bit more definition to it, a little more specifics, and maybe some more interaction, because that's also an online option that you don't get on the air, and be able to use some of these tools a little bit more. But I think that's the biggest thing we're really looking at over the next 5 years.
Well, and unfortunately, I mean, or fortunately, I don't know which way I would go with this. The reason that I'm a cartoon cat is because I don't think anybody wants to look at me. So, but video is part of the process now, and you almost are forced to have a component of a visual component of some kind in order to do these things. Where, podcasting, it's great because the name's flexible, so it's not like audio casting, so you'd only be audio. Right. So, but that wasn't the case even 5 years ago. And now, I mean, if you don't, then you just get missed by so many people because they only do on YouTube. So you have to be on YouTube. They only want to see this. And I think it's really interesting because even though the focus most of the time is just on the audio, people want to have a visual component.
Yeah, absolutely. And the visual component does legitimately add something. You can show things, you can get into more detail on stuff because you're not having to describe it. Picture's worth 1,000 words, which is very true. So I see, why that is important. And I do think that it has its place. Now, it's interesting you say that because I listen to, watch YouTube videos, all that kind of stuff like most other people do. But usually it's on in the background. There's a picture, but I'm listening to the audio because I'm doing something else. And, but you still expect to be able to look up at the screen and see something other than black. So it's
right. Yeah. Right. You want to have something moving around there, don't you? To know that everything's working. So, at the very least, but that's interesting that how it evolves like that and how people are there's an expectation, even if it's not great video or great visuals, that's better than no visuals.
Yeah, it seems
is
to
what
be
I
the
found.
case.
Yeah.
The one thing I will say to a lot of YouTube creators is please normalize the audio. There are a few things that you can do that makes it a little less, and on stuff like that, you're not expecting some, massive Hollywood production type of a thing. And most stuff isn't. And usually, frankly, I find those type of shows a lot more interesting. But you can do production with today's tools and stuff now and have a reasonably professional output, where everything kind of jives and works together. It's, may not be the same as if you had, Magic Light and Industrial Light and Sound do it or something like that. But at the end of the day, it will still work and work quite well. And that's one of the things that's really cool about the way this is going to now is because it does open the doors to a lot more people to be able to put something out there that may not appeal to the masses, but certainly has its audience, that type of a thing. And that audience wouldn't be able to get the content in normal ways and the producer wouldn't be able to present it. But now this creates that and makes it possible. So there are a lot of positives to that. And I also think that the direction of what we're going here, I think in the next 10 years, the technology will push it much further along than it is now. And we're going to see some things that we haven't thought of yet too.
So we mentioned here in the conversation the rise of artificial intelligence and so forth. So do you think, and I mean, they're already out there, so I'm describing something that is already in existence, but when AI starts producing content like you have for 10 years, then what's going to happen? So it's just going to be, you can type in and say, I want to hear about, episodic versions of, X. And then this thing would be able to produce those things. So what happens then? Because it's exponential creation at that point. Do you think that's going to happen? Do you think that's going to be a thing? Or do you think that people won't have an interest in that?
I think I look at it from the standpoint, because this question comes up a lot on our show, is AI going to take over the world? And if they did, more power to them, I'll retire. But I don't see that happening. I think what we're going to have is a combination of things. And we're already to a point now where you can conceivably do that. And I'll give a little spoiler alert, but later this year, we're working on an episode of our show that we're going to be interviewing one of the AIs that does one of the smart speakers, because that's possible now. And things like even ChatGPT have a phone number where you can call and talk to it just over
Mm-hmm.
the phone. I mean, so it isn't like that's in the future. It's here. But the thing of it is as far as one completely taking over the other, I don't see that happening. If you want dynamically generated content, so I want to hear the latest about some specific topic, AI would do that a lot better than humans because humans wouldn't have produced it yet, and the AI could do it instantly.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have the other side of it is where I think there's always going to be a reason and a need for regular human people to do shows as well. And I think what we're going to see is those things together. And we already are. I'll tell you one thing. I found this to be a little creepy, frankly, when I first found out about it. But because it could be abused, it seems like. But the platform that we use for recording is this internet thing, and it has a lot of features on it. And one of the issues that we've had is we'll have guests sometimes where they'll disconnect and it won't have completely uploaded the interview.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's an AI on there now where it'll analyze it and actually be able, type in what you wanted to say and it will finish the interview with the voice pitch and everything. You can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
And so,
that scares me. That scares me. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it is. And there's another company out of, I think it's Switzerland, that we're working with now. Because one of the things is personnel and these type of things and keeping your website updated and, all these type of things relevant are a big part of it. And from that standpoint, they have an AI that will actually look at the script of each week's episode and do your not your podcast post, like your blog posts and all of that kind of a thing. And we've been testing it out and it's like amazing. It even has deep links to other things. It generates pictures on the fly that are relevant, that are completely AI built, and that kind of a thing. Now, I know from our standpoint, we'll always say, hey, this was written by an AI so people know what's going on. But it does create a situation where the topics of a given week's show can be distributed faster, it's more accurate, and it's more readily available. So that does make sense. That doesn't mean we're going to go away, but it certainly does mean that tool is going to be something that we will continue to use, and it's very valid to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, and I just noticed this. Maybe I've seen it before, but I was watching a History Channel show, and they had an image on the screen, and it says digitally generated image at the bottom, and I hadn't noticed anybody put that before until I was watching the show, and I'm like, that's an AI image that now they're noting, right? I mean, it's kind of like one of those captions like don't try this at home kind of thing.
Right.
But not quite as obvious. It's even actually a little bit blended into the picture. But I was like, well, that is fascinating. So I wonder if going forward, kind of like, there's, I don't want to say rules, but it is good form to say this is an advertisement or contains advertisements now with certain shows on certain platforms, so that now you're going to say parts of this were created by AI. Even when you upload to YouTube now, there's a question that says, was this generated using artificial intelligence or something like that? That's not verbatim there, folks. But anyway, so you have to check yes or no, kind of just like you check yes or no, is this something for children? And so we've already seen the foundations being laid for calling these things out, so that way it's obvious, right? So there's no ambiguity. Yes, we use this. Yes, we use that. That's interesting, though, that it's already being kind of self-regulated in a way.
Yeah, there's people out there that are not going to disclose, and
sure.
Every so often they get called out on it. We saw that with Dungeons and Dragons last year with the this is all original artwork, and it turned out to be AI generated and created a big scandal. So from that kind of a standpoint, I don't have a problem with it if it's disclosed. And it's not just in YouTube and like what we're doing. My other co-host Gretchen is an author, and she just got her first book published last year. And one of the things that was done through the publisher is they require you to disclose, is any of this AI generated, the pictures, the content, that kind of a thing. And if it is, they require that you tell them. So we're seeing that in pretty much all media. But the thing of it is the person could easily check no when it is. Obviously, there's that. They might lie. So that's where it becomes a little bit sketchy.
Yeah, you're right. And writing is another one of these areas. AI does a great job of writing sometimes. And I mean, great. Like you mentioned before with the blog posts and so forth. And you would go through it and it wouldn't be, obvious that it was AI generated, especially if it's text. I think the pictures, at least at the moment, I will say, I can always kind of look at a picture and you get that kind of weird vibe on it at the
Yeah.
moment. Still, it's kind of like the uncanny valley when you're looking at CGI and so forth. But it's only going to get better. And so, yeah, it's going to be transparent, I think, probably within the next couple of years. I don't
Yeah, I
see it
usually
taking
see that
very long at
happening.
all. Yeah.
I see that
We won't
happening
even
very
know it'll be
easily.
transparent. It'll just be transparent. And then, that becomes another whole bag of issues because of, like you said, people just trying to pass it off as something else and something that's real. I think, well, fortunately and unfortunately, we'll kind of take a side road here real quick, is that, we have all this stuff going on in Congress about, things in the sky and extraterrestrials and machinery that's flying around that's not a plane and so forth. And now on the other side, we've got the ability to produce images that look incredibly realistic and video that's incredibly realistic, with anybody. I mean,
Yeah.
anyone can do it. And so the lines of reality continue to blur, right? So, we
Yeah.
have this whole notion of living in a simulation. Is the simulation folding in on itself becomes the question.
And and when you look at it, if you want to really get creepy with the whole Matrix type thing, it is it is certainly something that there's a lot of people that have had a lot of discussions about this and can put forward some evidence that does make it feel like that's possibility. It can it be proven? Of course not, but it's
Mm-hmm.
certainly begin to wonder, are we all simulation in a cube sitting on someone's desk in an alien planet somewhere? I mean, and the thing of it is I think if I've learned one thing just working in my life is anything's possible.
Mm-hmm.
It may be highly improbable, but it's certainly possible, right? So,
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's just so wild. I mean, we're talking about technology and so forth. It's just so wild to me that we live in this time when a generation ago none of this was even thought about.
yeah, yeah,
I
and it's
mean,
just, and I think a lot of just regular people don't really know where the technology is at, and I think it would scare them a little. But I mean, and I'll give you another topic. We have legitimate cyborgs in our world now too. I mean,
mhm.
you look at the definition of that, and there's actually a cyborg foundation where if you want to get your antenna or fins or whatever you can call them, and they have the technology to be able to do this kind of stuff. But in a more applicable thing, there's medical implants and stuff like that that already exist. So that road it's not that's in the future, that's happening now too. So
Right.
as far as the evolution of all of these type of things goes, it's not going to stop. I mean, it's going to continue to go forward. It's basically what we do with it. And I tend to look at tech from a standpoint that it's not good or bad. It's just it's there, and then you can use it for whatever purpose. And that's no different than, what things have been for the past time there's been humans. But the
Mhm.
difference being with it is the capability is so much greater that it ends up creating a situation where it can become downright scary.
Mhm.
And a lot of people are very much concerned that that's the direction we're going. I don't think we're going to see Skynet. I think we're going to see a blending of these things that will improve lives, these different type of things. But there will be people in this world that will try to use it for nefarious reasons, and that's going
Mhm.
to be a challenge. It already is.
Oh yeah. Well, I think probably the worst challenge that I'm noticing here lately is the fact that there's so much information that you cannot process it. I mean, you're inundated now with information, and it runs the gamut from being actually factual to being totally outlandish. And unfortunately, the outlandish gets as much credence sometimes as the factual.
Or
And
more.
there's, yeah, or more. Yeah, exactly. And you cannot, it's hard then, even for a person who is somewhat skilled at trying to find these things and wheedle them out, to do searches. It used to be, in the early days of the internet, you could do a search and you could find some information, that was from a reliable source, and you're like, okay, that's it, I'm done. Now you put in your search, and unless you are going to certain places, who knows what you're going to get.
Yeah.
Even on the first page, as it were, is the Google thing. People don't go more than three pages deep on Google. Kind of a situation. In the first three pages, you find all kinds of garbage. I mean, how are people, just regular average people, going to be able to help themselves discern all this?
It is very difficult, and it is a legitimate thing. And I look at it from a standpoint back in the day when you did news stories and stuff, you've got three sources, all that kind of stuff. And I think that while the world works completely differently now, using an attitude like that is important. So if you find something online that is like, okay, this is very interesting, try to cross-reference it and at least look up where it's coming from. And if its point of origin is the Onion or something like that, probably go to the next link.
Right.
Or enjoy it. I mean, I love the Onion articles,
yeah.
but they are, and there's been a few of them that have been picked up by the news outlets going, oh, this happened, not realizing it was satire. And that's one that's published as satire and says what it is. And there's a lot of stuff out there that doesn't have that byline. It's just, oh, here it is. So you do have to take some effort to be able to look at it and go, okay, is this real? Can I see it somewhere else? Is this coming off of a place that I've ever heard of? Or is it something weird? And that's one of the things you have to do. But the problem is it takes time to do it. So you can't just search and take it on face value. You do have to do a little bit of research into what you're getting to see if it's something that's real or something that's not. And I think that applies more to things that are a little bit outlandish. In our day and age, the politics that go along with stuff and all of that, there's all kinds of things out there. So to see if something's real, you almost have to go back to the source. Find that politician's speech, find the documents, that kind of a thing, which you can do online with very little work, but you still have to do it. And those kind of steps are going to become very important to know what's legit and what's not, especially as we're getting to a point, like you say, you can still sort of tell it's AI generated today, but 2 years down the road, that's very unlikely that's going to be the case.
Yeah, it just gets so hard. To me, at least for myself, I find that I don't want to invest. I don't necessarily want to invest. I don't want to listen to anything. So what I end up doing is going to the same sources over and over again if they have a really good track record for me, right? And so then I'm ignoring all this other stuff, which I don't know that that's necessarily the best solution, right? I stopped watching network news, probably over 20 years ago, because I was reading everything online at that point. But now everything's so invasive. It's like, maybe I'm going to go back to network news. I don't know what the deal is, but everybody still gets it wrong. And I think celebrity culture is probably one of the worst offenders, because the celebrities will get it wrong. And then the people follow the celebrities, and then all these people get this wrong because they're like, well, if Michael Jordan says it's right, he's my guy. So not throwing Michael Jordan under the bus or anything. He's the first thing that popped in my head, but I do find it really fascinating.
Classification for that, you're absolutely right. It depends on, do you trust, and a lot of people trust celebrities and origins like that a lot more than the news, and it's not for the wrong reason too. You've got to figure that network news and news in general is no different than other television shows. They're producing it to make money from the commercials, which means they need to have ratings, which means they're going to report what their audience wants to hear in some ways. I don't think it's maybe 180 degrees that way, but there definitely is a skew from different outlets to the audience and that type of a thing to keep their ratings up, to be able to sell commercials, which doesn't seem like the right reason to produce news, but you've got to make money. And that's what it's about.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So. And that's the hard part. And so I think, unfortunately, as we're moving with technology and so forth, that, the interesting thing to me over this time is you have these folks who are amateur journalists, or how you want to call whatever words you want to use for them, who are doing great job of things, but they're only in really small portions, right? They're not being paid by anybody. They're going out and doing this on their own, and making some things happen. The hard part, though, is to break on through, right? So to break on through to a level where basically you can live by doing these things. And that's the promise of the internet, right? But as far as the delivery so far, I think it's been hard to deliver on that for
Yeah.
the masses, right? So many podcasts, there's so many things out there. All of them can't be self-sustaining.
Yeah. And
Do you think there's an answer in there somewhere for that?
I was looking at statistics at that once, and it's something like about 10% of what you see on online content. I'm going to pick on YouTube because I think that's where this number came from,
Mm-hmm.
is actually self-sustaining. Like the person can make their living producing their videos and doing whatever it is they're doing, which means 90% can't. So only one
Mm-hmm.
out of 10, right? And as far as that kind of thing goes, it does make it difficult. And even productions that do hold their own, UserFriendly has been fortunate enough to do that for, a few years now. It's still, when you go out and you want to cover specific things, it does cost money to do that. I mean, you just have expenses, travel, and you're going to go cover this technology show or go. One of the things we've had recently is got an opportunity to check out a real world Ironman jetpack, which I've kind of become addicted to. But that, you have to travel there and it's the cost to do. Yeah, and all of this kind of stuff is just the case. But if you want to bring content that's accurate, you have to figure out a way to be able to do it. And I think that's one of the things that causes a lot of what we see to be very niche. Because if you were going to just do a general, I'm going to cover the news type thing, you'd have to be very well funded to do that. But if it's specifically, I'm going to just cover costume performers at Comic-Con, that's a little easier to bite off without having a huge budget. You have to get there, you have to get in, do, that type of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, there's a big difference in the cost of doing that versus something big. And you can do it well if you have a specific topic like that. And I think we're seeing a lot of that there's a lot of amazing content producers out there that do I look at it and it's like, it's not funded. They might monetize the video, but that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still bringing something that's easily as good as what you'd see on CNN or something. And to me, that is something I really respect, because that's where you're looking at exactly what you're talking about. It's somebody that doesn't necessarily have the funds to do a broad thing, but they're able to bring a specific topic, do it well, and be able to at least coexist with that and be able to fund what they're doing just for that. So I think going down the road, we're going to see a lot of that, but being able to access a niche audience for a niche topic allows that to be able to be a thing, which is totally something new with the internet.
Mm-hmm. That's very insightful. That gives me a lot to think about here on all these topics. I always ask myself these questions, and then I get a hold of somebody like you. I'm like, hey, I got to throw the question at them to see what they have to say. That was a fantastic answer on that topic. The other thing that you mentioned, YouTube, and YouTube's what I look at as a gatekeeper, right? So, even though only 10% can maintain, there's still 90% of that content that YouTube in essence is benefiting from, because it's still small, right? It's micro. And so they're still getting eyeballs for the micro, even though they're not paying out on that. So it's interesting. And if you think about it, there's more content in the micro than there is in the macro.
Right. Exactly.
And so they're really actually making more money possibly off of the micro stuff than they are the macro stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's very true, because the way YouTube pays their bills is they either have commercials or you buy a premium membership. That's their business model, and then they're basically able to get all of their content. They don't have to pay to produce it. And if you do get paid for your YouTube video, it's because enough people are watching it that a certain portion of their marketing goes to you. And if you want to look at it at a very 10,000 foot level, that's all it is. But at the end of the day, unlike Netflix and Disney Plus and some of these things that are paying hundreds of millions of dollars for content creation, YouTube's kind of pass that along to everybody else. The advantage is anybody else has the opportunity to present what they want within reason, obviously, and potentially get it out there. So you also have other reasons. It might be that, you're marketing your product or that kind of a thing, or you sell commercials or something on your own. These type of things are not an option in general media, which are in the case like YouTube. But at the end of the day, it's an amazing concept from the standpoint of YouTube, which is owned by Google now and has been for a long time. That we have this service. We're going to provide you the tools to do it. They do an excellent job at that. I've always been impressed with what they have. It works well, and it does what it's supposed to. But they basically have figured out a way. They don't have to pay to create content at all, because somebody else is going to do that for them. And it's kind of a win-win. The content creators have an avenue that they wouldn't normally, And YouTube has the ability to present a lot of different things on a lot of different topics that you wouldn't see anywhere else and not have to pay for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Well, depending on who you are, you think the balance is tipped a little bit in YouTube's favor because they're the ones that get a hold the bag of money at the end of the day with
Of course it
everybody
is.
else.
Yeah, of course it is, and it
But
absolutely
they're
always will
yeah,
be. But
yeah.
you know,
When they first started, that wasn't the case. They were basically, I remember all the stories of whenever they were like, we need more money to pay for servers to keep this thing going. Back in what, like 2006, 2007.
yeah.
And yeah, it was a wild time back then before they got absorbed into Google. But I usually try to keep these things in an hour, and we're getting close to our hour. I don't want to keep you too long,
No,
and
but
I
this has been a
appreciate your
fun
time.
conversation. It
Yeah,
really
well,
has.
we're all over the place. We're all over the place.
Excuse me just a minute.
Oh yeah, go ahead. So, but everybody, go ahead and go see, check out UserFriendly Show, userfriendlyshow.com. You can see Bill and everybody else on there, and they have lots of experience and done this for a really long time. And it's a lot of fun, and it's a lot of information.
We welcome everybody. Please check it out, and we'd love to hear from you too. Like we were talking about earlier, it's how we do our programming. So check it out. Let us know what you think.
Yeah. And you can also listen in Portland and Seattle on the radio if you happen to be, internet challenged or something. So that's the interesting part to me. I'm like, wow, he's straddling the eras here. So it's fantastic.
Doing both. Hey, you know what? We talk about rectotech sometimes, so we've got to do both, right?
You got to do both. Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks, Bill, so much. Hang on just a second. We'll close it up. And thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you next time.